The chassis from basically this point right here forward is not a whole lot of difference than any other steam locomotive. The reverse unit, the piston lever or arm, the piston gear, wheels, axles, side rod, side linkages, field, armature, pretty much the same, and I'd use the same cleaning technique on it all to remove excessive oil and grease. I'm surprised these wheels did not come off the axle during its lifetime because of the excessive grease and oil. Now, supposedly it was rebuilt. I have no reason to doubt it was rebuilt, but I didn't see a lot of evidence. I saw a couple of things. One is these really soft, flexible wires that were put on the back. This looks to be more of a modern wire, the soft, flexible type. I've heard it's got a new armature. The brushes were a different story, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So it just did the standard cleaning on the field, the armature. I did grind the armature a little bit. Another feature of the armature was that it had considerable amount visible to the naked eye of carbon dust in the slots. Now from here back, it gets a little bit different. The structure of this brush bracket assembly right here, of course, is different than the shoulder brush bracket assembly that you find in most of the steam locomotives. It's the same one. It's in the 060 switcher, in that the brushes are side mounted right here at this contact point. And of course, you've got the other challenge. You've got the reverse unit kind of in your way, a two-position reverse unit, fairly easy to clean up just a little bit. But you have to be careful in that it's got single-stranded wires going to, for example, on this side, that contact point right there. So as you handle the brush bracket assembly and you handle the reverse unit, you have to be very careful with those single-stranded wires. One of mine broke as I was doing this, but fortunately it snapped off right at the solder point, so I was able to resolder it. Now this has a little bit different look to it. We'll look at the back of it in just a minute, but there's one of the side-mounted brushes. And let me show you how those are held on. Because the springs are going straight in to the commutator, the drum style commutator, you have to squeeze down on the brush holder. And that's done with that little plate right there on the same screw that mounts the brush bracket assembly. So if you want to take out the brush holder, loosening the pressure on this screw, which also loosens up the structure right here of the brush bracket assembly that's attached to the field. This one, of course, holds the reverse unit on. Loosen this up and that plate will begin to move, and then you should be able to pull that straight out. Now, this one was a challenge because how short these wires are. So I had to take this one off completely. Make sure as you replace these, you replace the insulation. So this is a two-piece right here. It's got metal on the outside. It's got an insulating fiber board, and then the brush bracket assembly itself. So this pulls out, and you got your square brush holders, square brushes that are held in with a coil spring, but there is one little different on the spring, and that is it's got a cap or a eyelet that goes on the end of it that touches the brush. You'll just have to get some techniques down for taking these off and putting them back in. I usually insert the brush and then slide the square brush holder with the spring in it down to the brush, and I have to hold it upside down so that the spring doesn't come out, and push it in and just keep shaking it until the brush falls down into the holder, and then squeeze it in and then tighten the screw. So on this side right here is the screw behind these wires. There's the screw on the bottom that holds the plate that holds the side mounted. So if you got experience on the 060, it's pretty much the same thing, just a little bit more of a challenge because you've got to handle that reverse unit basically at the same time. The owner mentioned that this was not working, not running, not operating, and I'd have no reason to doubt that, of course, but I could certainly see why. When I disassembled this piece right here, there was oil and grease everywhere, including all over the commutator. The commutator was pretty black, but it was also pretty greasy, and that is a roadmap to failure. The brushes were too short. But here was probably one of the most serious issues. The springs inside the brush holders were compressed. They were crushed. They were pushed all the way down so that they had no spring tension whatsoever. The brush was literally floating in there. In one of them, the cap, or the little eyelet that goes on top of the spring that touches the brush, was twisted sideways just a bit in the spring. So there was no chance that there was any spring pressure coming out of that. In addition to that, the brushes were way too short. Apparently they had been in there for a lifetime to be that short. So that had to all be cleaned out, and it took a while using pipe cleaners, and in this case I used surgical, what I call surgical type of Q-tips that are on the wooden stick, a little bit longer wooden stick, 6 inches. Those seem to be a little bit tighter woven on the head, on the cotton head, and they're a little bit easier to handle, and you can scrub a little bit harder with them, which I had to do inside of these brush holders. So there was the challenge, was just cleanliness. These things are not designed to be saturated in grease and oil. Of course, I came back right here and made sure that the worm gear in its bushing was lubricated, also that the spacing washers were properly replaced, and a light lubrication, as well as the back of the armature as it goes into the bushing, or right here, where it's bearing on the back of the reverse unit. I had already taken this apart by just removing the smoke unit, removing the piston and the piston arm or lever, removed the field, dropped the brush bracket assembly off, took out the armature, did all the standard cleaning and polishing, in addition to grinding the commutator down to be smooth and clean. All side linkages. Now I've got these side linkages on because the next thing I'm going to do on this train is a track stand test. So it was quite the cleanup challenge. You can see it turned out really nice. You can see how clean the armature, the commutator is. But look how nice this turns. It almost rotates just about a little bit by itself. I was able to verify that it does have brush pressure by simply using an X-Acto knife to go in there and just flick it a couple of times just to make sure. If the reverse unit hangs a little bit, I'm just going to touch it up with just a little CRC 226, making sure I lightly put some in on the sides, not straight in, because I don't want to get even a slight mist up here around that commutator at all. And of course, the last thing I'll do is finish the lubrication by putting gear lube on the main drive gear. The next step is the track stand test, just to make sure electrically everything is good to go, and I'll simply hook up the power directly to these power cables, and then we'll begin reassembly without the boiler body in place. But I'll go ahead and finish out by putting the body, no, I can't put the body on the, I don't want to put the body on the tender yet because I've got to run these cables back and put them at their contact points, and I've got to reconnect the light to this front contact point. The other thing I found on these contact points on the tender was a huge pile and stack of solder, which may be needed in someone's view. That's what needs to hold, but I don't think that's true. It just needs a little bit of solder. The thicker and higher and more densely you get the solder, the more of a point of resistance that's being created, and also a point of heat. So let's wrap it up and go on to the track stand test.